good to see everybody back this evening. Good to be back with y'all this evening. So I told you last Sunday, my first Sunday here since we graduated school, that I had a consistent plan, a consistent series, if you will, for Sunday mornings and sermons, Sunday morning Bible class, and Wednesday nights. I didn't have a consistent plan for Sunday nights. I couldn't decide what I wanted to do. But for now, I do have a consistent plan for what we're going to do every Sunday night. So what we're going to do, at least for a while, but for the most part, is just look at a character from the Bible, different characters. We looked at Enoch, or as I learned last week, that I may pronounce it wrong, it may be Enoch. So if that was wrong, Enoch, it may be Enoch, might be better. But today, we looked at Enoch last week. Today we're going to be looking at Ruth. Some lessons we can learn from Ruth. Maybe an overview of Ruth and some different attributes about Ruth and her husband Boaz and her mother-in-law Naomi and her sister-in-law Orpah. So if you would, open with me to the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth, it seems to be that it's very strategically placed between the book of Judges and 1 Samuel. The reason I say that is because the book of Judges is a very harsh book. It's full of a lot of war, a lot of turmoil. It shows a very difficult time in the nation of Israel. After they become a nation, become established, or not really as a nation, but as a people there, and they take the land of Canaan. The book of Judges tells us about the leaders, these judges that they had in place to lead the people. And throughout these judges leading them, despite good leadership they had often, they became very wicked. We see some very wicked things done in Israel among the people. We also see some great battles won by these judges. So it's a book of bloodshed and war and pain, and not a very pleasant thing to think about. Very interesting, but not very pleasant. Well, then we have the book of 1 Samuel, which starts there. We see that Israel's still rebelling. They say that they tell the judge, the last judge, Samuel, they want a king, an earthly king, a physical king they can see, and he installs Saul as king, and things go downhill from there until David takes the throne. We see a lot of turmoil, a lot of war and bloodshed in the books of 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. But Ruth is placed right here between Judges and 1 Samuel, and has a very different attitude to the book of Ruth. Very different vibes to the book of Ruth. It's calm. It tells a story about a woman who is faithful, who marries a faithful man. It gives a glimpse of hope and a glimpse of Christ we even see in the book of Ruth, opposed to the two books that it's sandwiched between. So the book of Ruth tells about this Moabite woman. Moab was a nation that across the Dead Sea from the nation of Israel, and Moab was a pagan nation. That was not God's people. They were pagans. They were worshippers of other gods, not the Jehovah God, the one true God that Israel was supposed to be worshiping. So that's the lifestyle Ruth had. That's the land, the people that Ruth came from. She did not have a good background. Yet Ruth, she remains faithful during a time of even the nation of Israel, of their faithlessness, of their problems and rebelling against God at times. The book of Ruth, it takes place sometime in the Judges, maybe toward the end of the period of the Judges. We don't know exactly when, but most likely here in the period of the Judges, a time of lawlessness in the land of Israel. But Ruth, she becomes faithful to God and remains faithful to God. And she even becomes, is blessed with a new husband and a son, and she gets a position in the lineage of Christ. Toward the end of the book, we see that she is in the lineage of Christ. She is an ancestor of Christ, and she's mentioned in Matthew 1 as an ancestor of Christ. A pagan Moabite woman not an Israelite, mentioned in the ancestry of Christ. Also, Rahab was mentioned in the ancestry of Christ. She was an ancestor of Christ, although she was not part of the nation of Israel, part of God's people in the Old Testament. So, Ruth, this will be the focus this evening. Ruth the Moabitess. The first thing we want to look at about Ruth and glean from Ruth and her life is that she was a loyal person. Now, first we see her loyalty not necessarily directly to God, but to her mother-in-law, Naomi. Now, Ruth, she is Moabitess. She's from Moab. Naomi, her mother-in-law, years before, we learned in the beginning of Ruth 1 that Naomi and her husband Elimelech, they moved from Israel, from Bethlehem in Israel, the place where Jesus was born, coincidentally, or not coincidentally, but incidentally. On purpose, most likely. They were in Bethlehem where Jesus was born. Later on, he would be born, and they leave there because there's a famine. They can't get any food. So they make the decision, her and her husband Elimelech, to take their family to live in Moab, where they can live and work and have grain, have bread, have food. It's also interesting to note that place, Bethlehem, it means house of bread. And that's where Jesus, the bread of life, was born. Yet, it seems ironic that at that time when Elimelech and Naomi, Ruth's in-laws, had to leave Bethlehem, there was no bread. It's empty. When later on, all this, the bread of life spiritually would come from that place, Bethlehem, would be born there. So Naomi's children marry there in Moab, and one of her sons marries this woman, Ruth. The other, this woman, Orpah. So Ruth has a sister-in-law, Orpah, that's mentioned. So Ruth and Orpah are Naomi's daughter-in-laws. Well, both sons and Elimelech, all their husbands end up dying, passing away. So these three ladies are all alone. In ancient times, that's not a good thing for a woman to be all alone. A woman now could make it all alone. That certainly probably could. Could find a job and live on her own. Well, in their time, it wasn't like that. They needed a man. They needed someone else to help them possible. So this was a big deal for these three ladies to now be widowed. So they had to do something about it. We don't get a lot of details there, but other than Naomi, she decides to go back home. Go back home to God's people, where she came from, her family in Bethlehem of the land of Israel. Now it's interesting to note here in verse 13 and 14 and 15 that Naomi is trying to convince both of them, Ruth and Orpah, her daughter-in-laws, to stay there in Moab, in this pagan land. She doesn't want them to come with her. She wants them to stay there. I say it's interesting because Naomi, she is an Israelite. She most likely knows the truth. She knows about the one true God. She knows that this land where she is pagan. Most likely Ruth and Orpah still remaining there without Naomi and her family. What are the chances that they're going to stay faithful to God or become faithful to God? What are the chances they're going to worship these false little g gods? Lots of the chances were high they would worship false gods. Yet Naomi, she doesn't seem to think about that. Maybe she's just thinking physical things. Well, they would be better off here because they could find a husband easier here in their own homeland, among their own people. Maybe there was more food there. There was more work there for a woman. I don't know. But certainly, she neglected the spiritual aspect of her daughters-in-laws. So Orpah took her advice, her bad advice, to stay there in Moab. Orpah did not make it to the land of Israel. She did not make it back to Bethlehem with them. And I wonder what happened to Orpah. We know what happens to Ruth later on. She becomes faithful to God and then remains faithful to God. Becomes a part of the lineage of Christ even. But Orpah, she stays back home with her people in Moab, pagan people. I wonder if she ever became faithful to God, or if she went back to that false, or stayed with that false religion, those false gods there in Moab. It's a sad thought to think about, but to contrast, we're going to focus on Ruth from here on out. Verse 15, read with me. So Naomi is trying to get them to stay with her, but verse 15, Naomi rather says, and she said, behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back into her people, and unto her gods, little g gods. So Naomi knows these are false gods. Maybe she doesn't understand the magnitude of worshiping false gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. And here's Ruth's response. Her very famous response, I might add. It sometimes can give chills reading her response and thinking about her commitment that she had to Naomi. And certainly it's something to pattern after, this kind of loyalty that she had. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after them. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. And thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God. Notice, we have little g gods there in verse 15, but then we move down here to verse 16, and Ruth speaking about Naomi's God as God, the one true God. It seems Ruth had an idea, maybe from Naomi, maybe from her husband and her brother-in-law and her father-in-law and their family, who this one true God was beforehand. Maybe she already had a faith in this one true God. Maybe that's why she didn't want to stay in Moab, one reason. She wanted Naomi's God to be her God. Orpah didn't seem to be as concerned about that as Naomi. Read with me, verse 17. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to thee, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. She's going to be loyal to her mother-in-law, Naomi. Imagine having a daughter-in-law like Ruth, or having that kind of relationship. That is a strong bond they have there that they've developed over the years, or however long her and her husband were married. So after they return to Bethlehem, she ends up making this trip with her, and Ruth continues to show loyal love to her, what seems to be aging mother-in-law, Naomi. And loyalty becomes a very big part of this book, something we learn from Ruth. Number 2, we learn loyalty from Ruth. She was loyal to her mother-in-law, and she's also loyal to God ultimately throughout all this. The one true God instead of the gods she grew up with, the gods she would have known back in Moab. And number 2, we learn a work ethic from Ruth. We learn hard work and diligence and what that's all about. It's interesting, Ruth's a woman, one of the few women who were the only woman other than one other who there's an entire book dedicated to that woman, and maybe it's even more so that the book of Ruth hones in on her more than the other book. The other book is Esther. It is dedicated to a woman, Esther, a faithful woman, and the things she did. But it's interesting, these women, men and women alike, can learn from their ethics, from their faithfulness, from the things that they did. So men and women can both certainly learn from Ruth's work ethic and the diligence and the hard work that she was determined to do and that she did. So they reached the new home, and Ruth had to go to work. She had to do something. There was no man around to support them. They didn't have just spoons of money or something or inheritance lying around that they could just live off of. They had to do something. She had to do something so that they could live. So this is not a new town for Naomi. It's her hometown, but for Ruth, this is a new town, a new place. So she finds the field of Boaz here in chapter 2, and it implies or says that she knew this was Boaz's field, who was Naomi's kin, some family of Naomi, some family of her deceased husband, her in-laws. So she gleans in that field. She gleans the wheat. We might call it wheat. The King James calls it corn. It's not corn like we would think of corn today. It would have been more of ears of maybe some sort of wheat they gleans and make bread. But she gleaned in a field nearby so that she could support her and Naomi, feed her and her aging mother. Now, it's also interesting to note that her gleaning in this field seems maybe kind of odd. She just went gleaning in this field. But under the law of Moses, it was perfectly acceptable for the owners of the field to allow the poor to glean part of the field. They were supposed to leave part behind, the corners, if you will, behind for the poor, for people who did not have the means of growing their food or buying their food. So the poor people could come by and they could glean that wheat at their will, and they could eat. That way no one went hungry. Kind of a law of Moses system of welfare, if you will. So that's kind of what Ruth is doing here, although she does ask permission to glean in this field. But her work ethic, gleaning in this field, taking care of her father-in-law, certainly it may have been kind of stood out that this woman by herself, single, widowed, is gleaning in this field by herself. It doesn't go unnoticed. The owner of the field, this rich man Boaz, notices what she's doing. Read here in verse 7 what she says to him, how graceful she is. And she said, I pray you, says Boaz, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and had continued eating from the morning until now, that she tarried a little in the house. In verse 8, then said Boaz unto Ruth, hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean another field. He didn't want to leave his field. Neither go from thence, but abide here, fast by my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field, that they do reap, and thou goest after them. Have I not charged the young men that they will not touch thee? And when thou art thirst, go into the vessels and drink of that which the young men have drawn. So it seems Ruth, not only is she allowed to glean in this field, she's receiving special privileges from the owner of the field. He's going to tell her, you take all you need. It seemed to imply extra. She wasn't taking all that he tells her to take now. She wasn't going and just taking the water that he had provided for his workers. But now he says, you got to take that water too. Not only that, he's protecting her. I picture Boaz as this, because the Bible seems to picture Boaz. He's a rich man. He's wealthy. He has a business, if you will. He has a farm, and he has people working for him, men working for him. But this man seems to be very righteous, very strong. He sees this woman, and he uses his authority to protect her, and tell his men not to bother her. These are supposed to be godly men. These are the people of Israel. But also remember, this is the time of the judges. He probably thought, you never know what might come of this. So he protects her and tells his men not to bother her, and let her glean as she wishes. You know, God hates. Ruth had a good work ethic. God hates a bad work ethic in people. Often we see that today. People have a bad work ethic. People don't. Maybe they're not taught growing up. Maybe they don't learn as they get older. And people think, well, it's all about me. It's all about what I need, what I want. And don't consider anyone else. And that we all have to work in order to have anything. Somebody has to work. If someone doesn't work, and they have something, someone else worked to get that thing for them, to get that money, that inheritance, whatever it is they have, or free things for them. A bad work ethic is something that God despises. He's despised it all the way from the beginning. He warned the Israelites about it, and he warns us about it in the New Testament through Paul. 1 Timothy 5:8, what did Paul say? He said, if any man provide not for his own, he's worse than an infidel. An infidel, an unbeliever, somebody who's separated from God. If you're a Christian man, but you do not provide for your family, you're worse than an unbeliever. That's some strong words there about a man who decides to be lazy. I say that in light of Ruth is a woman, but we can learn this work ethic, men and women, from Ruth. She had to go out and sort of do a man's job to provide for her family. And she did that. She did a very good job with that. It's admirable how she's making the worst situation very good, very much better for her. This is a bad situation. She has bad things on all sides. Her husband's died, her brother-in-law's died, her father-in-law's died. Her sister didn't come with her. She stayed back in Moab. She's in a brand new, strange place, maybe even considered an outcast, being new there. And not one of them necessarily. They're poor. They don't have anything but a place to live, a roof over their head. And who knows what that consisted of. But she's making the most out of the situation. She's graceful. You know, we read in the very beginning, you didn't mention that, Naomi complained. Naomi complained. It's woe is me, because she's had a rough time. She's lost her husband and her 2 sons. We would complain as well. But she complained. She's an elderly lady who's going through a difficult time, and she's crying out. She's complaining to her daughter-in-laws. We never hear, not that she didn't complain at all. We certainly don't read about one gripe, one complaint from Ruth. She has a great work with. Third, we learn from Ruth that she was humble and obedient. So Naomi gave bad advice to Ruth the first time. She told Ruth to stay back in Moab with her gods and her people, her little g gods and her people. But now she gives Ruth some good advice. She's met this man Boaz, who's part of the family, Naomi's family rather, and Boaz has taken a liking to her, is interested in her. She's a widow. And now Naomi tells her what she needs to do to get Boaz to marry her. Let's read what she tells her to do. It sounds very strange when we read what Naomi says to do for Boaz to marry her. Read here in verses 3 through 4. She tells her, she says, "Wash thyself therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor. But make not thyself known unto the man, until he shall have done eating and drinking." Verse 4, "And it shall be, when he lieth down, that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet, and lay thee down. And he will tell thee what thou shalt do. And she said unto her, All that thou sayest unto me, I will do." And starting verse 6, she goes and does these things. It doesn't seem to give some detail here, but it's hard to picture what she's doing there. But Boaz, evidently, this was part of their custom. He would eat, and he would be sleeping maybe beside the grain at night to watch the grain, watch the things that the harvest they've made, so that no one comes to steal it. And Ruth was to go, according to her mother-in-law Naomi's advice, go and lay down at his feet and wait for him to wake up so that she can make this request unto him for him to spread his skirt over her, not literally, but in the sense that he would make her his wife, make her part of him his wife. This couldn't have been an easy thing for Ruth to do. Yes, she did it. She let her request made known unto Boaz, and Boaz took it very well. Boaz, we see a lot of integrity in Ruth, but we see some more integrity in Boaz. She comes and does this at night, and the first thing Boaz is concerned about is Ruth's reputation. Now, she's been here in Israel for some time now, and she has evidently made a good impression on the people there. Boaz is concerned about her reputation, so he tells her to wait until in the morning, in the daylight, to go out to leave there, so that she does not, it does not seem that she has spent the night with him or something like that. He protects her reputation, and he seems to be a man of integrity. He also wants to make sure that he's going to follow the law. There are certain laws concerning marrying someone during that time. A widow, specifically we're talking about now. And the laws concerning that at this time were the closest of kin, the nearest of kin to her late husband was the one that had the right to marry her. Well, Boaz wanted to make sure that no one else was interested in taking her up on this marriage. So he allowed this to be known, and another kinsman did show up, but decided that marrying Ruth had more tied to it, taking care of her mother-in-law as well was going to be tied to this. He decided that was not worth doing that. But Boaz decided that it was worth it. Boaz, here in chapter 4, the very last chapter of Ruth, decided to marry Ruth. And so marrying Ruth came great blessings for Ruth. Ruth's been through the ringer, living in Moab, leaving Moab, and coming back with her mother-in-law, her for the first time, to the land of Israel, to this town of Bethlehem. And she's worked to the bone, trying to support her and her mother-in-law by herself. And now all this labor, the fruits of her labor, are now showing when Boaz decides to marry her, this wealthy, rich man. We found out there in chapter 2 how wealthy he is and how rich he is. Ruth was blessed when he married her. For one, the land that was her father-in-law Elimelech's that he lost when they went to Moab was able to be redeemed by Boaz. So she was able to get that back. The family was able to get that land back, which would have helped them financially, certainly. Number 2, she was able to get a new husband. She had lost her first husband. Now she has a husband, a wealthy husband at that, who is full of integrity, who supports her and already loves her, it seems. Third, it seems that they didn't have, her and her first husband were not able to have any children because she didn't have any children to begin with. But God blesses her and Boaz and Obed, who then has Jesse, who's the father of David. And then from David down to Christ. Which there she is in the lineage of Christ. Ruth kept a great attitude through great difficulties, great turmoil, and she reaped the benefits of keeping that good attitude. The book of Ruth begins with funerals. The funeral for Ruth's husband, for Orpah's husband, and Naomi's husband. But it ends with a wedding. What a wonderful thing to go from a funeral to a wedding, go from death to the phase of new life we mentioned this morning, that marriage is. Naomi and Ruth's relationship emphasized the importance of loyalty, and Ruth emphasizes in her life and Boaz the importance of integrity and living a good life and being faithful to God ultimately and the good that comes from it. Ruth was rewarded for her servant attitude and faithfulness to God and His people. This evening, as we close this evening, if you are a Christian here and you are struggling in need of prayer, in need of encouragement, we're here for you. The body